Welcome to the Washington Brief, our first episode for 2022 here on January 4. Our moderator today is Dr. Michael Jenkins, president of the Washington Times Foundation, which sponsors the Washington Brief webcast. He's also chairman of Washington Times Holdings, the company that owns the news organization. He has led a number of well-received fact-finding trips to Korea and Japan that have met with the legislative, executive, intelligence, and military leadership of those countries, including our special guest today. As president of the nonprofit NGO Universal Peace Federation International, Dr. Jenkins has decades-long experience conducting peace initiatives all over the world, particularly in Northeast Asia and the Middle East. Welcome, Dr. Jenkins.
Thank you, Larry, and welcome to our audience, both in the United States and throughout the world. We're honored to present the Washington Brief on the first Tuesday of every month. We have experts that assemble together to discuss the situation of Northeast Asia, particularly focused on the Korean Peninsula. I'm very honored at this time to present our panel and our moderator, Ambassador Christopher Hill. Ambassador Hill was the 2021 Charles W. Ball Professor of the Practice of Diplomacy at Columbia University School of International Public Affairs before his current position. He was Chief Advisor for Global Engagement to the Chancellor of Denver University, as well as the Dean of the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies at the university. Ambassador Hill is a distinguished career diplomat, four-time ambassador appointed by three presidents, U.S. Ambassador to Macedonia, Poland, Korea, and Iraq. Prior to his posting in Iraq, Ambassador Hill served as the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, during which time he also headed the U.S. delegation for the six-party talks on the North Korean nuclear issue. We also have with us today, who's our regular panelist, is Ambassador Joseph Detrani. Ambassador Detrani was the former special envoy for negotiations for North Korea and the director of the National Counterproliferation Center. He was an associate director of national intelligence and the mission manager for North Korea. He's the associate director of the national intelligence area for Korea, and he's a veteran of the CIA and currently a professor at Missouri State University's Graduate School, Department of Defense and Strategic Studies. Also, we're honored to present to you Dr. Alexandre Mansourov. Dr. Mansourov is a professor of Security Studies at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Services at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He's also the adjunct professor for Korean Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. He is one of the few people in the U.S. who holds advanced degrees from the Moscow State University of International Relations, Columbia University in New York, and the Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang. And now we're very honored to present to you Admiral Harry Harris, who is our special guest speaker this time. Widely regarded for his leadership, Ambassador Harris and Admiral Harris, who we really refer to, was selected to serve to two presidential administrations. First, to lead one of the military's most challenging roles at a critical time when U.S. was confronted by the rise of new world powers and nuclear threats, and later as a U.S. ambassador to Korea. Ambassador Harris took command of U.S. PACOM in 2015, which is now also called Indo-PACOM, the oldest multi-service command that stretches from California to the Indian Ocean, from the Arctic Sea to Antarctica. As commander, he ensured America's joint forces were postured and prepared to support combined forces and support the combined forces commander in South Korea against aggression of the North. He was the first American of Japanese descent to lead the U.S. Pacific Command and the highest ranking Asian American in the history of the U.S. Navy. Prior to leading U.S. PACOM, Admiral Harris served in a variety of roles in the U.S. Navy, including as representative of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to the Secretaries of State Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, and the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. A naval flight officer, he served in every geographic combat region and participated in several major operations, including Desert Storm, Enduring Freedom, and Iraqi Freedom, and Odyssey Dawn. In total, Admiral Harris has logged 4,400 total flight hours, including more than 400 combat hours. He retired from the military as a four-star admiral in June of 2018. Following his military requirement, he was sworn in as the U.S. ambassador to the Republic of Korea, serving in that position till January of 2021. Our moderator today is a distinguished ambassador, Christopher Hill. Chris, we'd like to turn it over to you now to moderate this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jenkins, and thank you, Larry Moffat, as well, for welcoming all of us to the Washington Brief. In this new year, we don't know what will come of 2022, but no doubt it will be a very interesting time, and especially, I think, an interesting time for the Indo-Pacific region. And what better person than to start this year off, than to have Admiral Harry Harris. Now, we had a bit of a discussion. Do we call him Admiral? Do we call him Ambassador? And I think he pointed out, well, I spent some 40 years in the Navy becoming admiral, and probably less time becoming ambassador. But I would argue that his becoming ambassador had something to do with his 4 stars as an admiral. It also had something to do with his very deep knowledge of the region, of the Indo-Pacific region, visiting every country in the region, or most every country in the region, and certainly having enormous responsibilities in the event of an issue in Northeast Asia, that is the Korean Peninsula. So I think today what we're going to have is really the treat of having Admiral Harris maybe talk to us a little about responsibilities that PACOM has had, and then talk about really one of the new features on in the architecture, in the landscape, or I really should say seascape of East Asia Pacific, and that is the development of the Quad, and whether the Quad could lead to something else or some other configuration, because I think the Quad is very much a work in progress. It's really started in a way that I don't think many people expected to see how strong it's become, how successful it's become in terms of knitting some U.S. partners and allies together. So I think we have a real opportunity to learn a lot on sort of whether the Quad, and do we expect to see more. So without further ado, I think I will turn it over to Admiral Harris. He'll speak for 15, 20 minutes. Frankly, he'll speak for as long as he wants. And then we'll join in with comment, perhaps a little commentary, but also some questions for him from Ambassador Joe Detrani and Professor Alex Mansourov, and I'll have a thought or two as well. So let me turn it over to Admiral Harry Harris. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador Hill and Dr. Jenkins for that kind introduction. And thanks to the Washington Times Foundation for putting together this important series on the Indo-Pacific region in general and the Quad in particular, against the backdrop of the U.S.-South Korea alliance and amid the great challenges posed by the People's Republic of China, or the PRC. I'm honored to join Ambassadors Hill and Detrani and Drs. Mansourov and Jenkins today. Ambassador Hill was of tremendous help to me after I became the ambassador to South Korea, and I learned a lot from reading his book, The Outpost, and I encourage you all to look at it as well. Congratulations to him for taking yet another one for America's team to serve in his 4th or 5th or 6th, depending on how you count, this time as our man in Serbia. Here's hoping for a speedy confirmation. We need you there. So, ladies and gentlemen, this group has forgotten more about the Korean Peninsula than I'll ever know. So it's my honor, and to be frank with you, my trepidation to share the virtual stage with this panel. So I thought that I'd begin by giving you the wave tops about some things that I've been thinking about lately. Not only my thoughts on the alliance between the US and South Korea, but other things too. We can go off from there in any direction, either in questions and answers or discussion or both. So first off, I want to talk about COVID just for a moment. After a promising September and October, trend lines are all in the wrong direction in many parts of the US and Europe, especially if you're unvaccinated. Korea's approach to COVID-19 has been lauded, and rightly so, as a global model. It's not that complicated. Follow the rules and follow the science. Unless you believe that vaccinations will inject a tracking device in your arm, or you get your medical advice from talk radio and your meds from veterinarians. Second, it's hard to take the podium these days, rhetorically, virtually, or actually, given my career in the military, without at least mentioning the fall of Afghanistan. So let me get right to that. The president's decision to withdraw was, in my mind, the right decision. After all, he campaigned on it and he was elected. You can't blame an elected official for sticking to his or her campaign promises. However, and it's a big however, the execution was deeply flawed. Either the intelligence community got it wrong regarding the speed with which the Taliban took over, which is an intelligence failure, or the intelligence community got it right, in which case it's a failure of government. We must understand what happened so it doesn't happen again. I'll also opine that even though the president inherited a deeply flawed Taliban deal from the previous administration, he not only accepted it, he embraced it, only sliding the end date by a couple of months. Therefore, he owned it, both it and the aftermath of the decision to pull out. Bottom line, I've gone through 3 stages of grief so far: shock at the speed that Afghanistan collapsed, anguish at the debacle of the pullout, and anger for those killed and left behind. But, ladies and gentlemen, I have to admit, I'm stuck on anger. Now, I don't want to give a full-throated speech today. You want to ask questions, and I want to engage in discussion and debate. So I'll talk briefly about the following 10 topics and save the details for the Q&A session afterwards. First, the Korean Peninsula, specifically sanctions, joint military exercises, and the end of war declaration. I'll simply say that the quest for dialogue with the North must never be made at the expense of the ability to respond to threats from the North. Dialogue and military readiness must go hand in hand. Idealism must be rooted in realism. I firmly believe that we must not relax sanctions or reduce joint military exercises just to get North Korea to come to the negotiating table. This is a tried and true road to failure. If exercises and sanctions are reduced as an outcome of negotiations, fine. That's why we have negotiations. But don't give them away beforehand. Now, regarding the end of war declaration, we should ask ourselves what will change the day after the declaration is signed. It's not a peace treaty. The armistice will still be extant. Our treaty obligations to defend South Korea will still be extant. And North Korea's missile, nuclear, chemical, and conventional capabilities will still be extant. I always thought we had an end of war declaration. It's called the Armistice Agreement, and it has served us well for decades. 2, alliances under the Biden administration. International relationships matter and alliances matter. They are the most integral element of U.S. foreign policy. The Biden administration recognizes that alliances aren't luxuries, they're essentials. The president calls alliances our greatest asset. Last April, in an op-ed, Secretaries Blinken and Austin made clear that alliances are vital to our national security. They deliver for the American people. In my opinion, this guidance underscores that when working with our allies, give and take is preferred to slash and burn. And the textbook case in point is the almost 71-year U.S.-South Korea alliance. Folks, I know that the U.S. is fully committed to this alliance and it stands firmly with South Korea. So I believe that the outlook for the alliance is good. This is important because, as you all are well aware, North Korea and the PRC will continuously test the resolve of this alliance and will seek ways to weaken our strong ties and sow doubt in order to divide us. I also hope that our enemies don't learn the wrong lesson from our withdrawal from Afghanistan. Third, the 2018 Singapore Agreement with North Korea. It's unfortunate that North Korea has not yet embraced the opportunities presented by 3 U.S. and 3 South Korean presidential summits. The U.S. continues to seek transform relations between Washington and Pyongyang, lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula, and the complete denuclearization of North Korea, all of which were agreed upon in Singapore in 2018 and will set the conditions for a brighter future for the North Korean people. Now, while I believe that Singapore was not a perfect agreement, it's a good starting point from which to pursue peace on the peninsula. I also believe that, sadly, North Korea missed a great opportunity in Hanoi, and they won't likely get another chance like that. Fourth, KJU, Kim Jong-un's objectives. I believe that KJU wants four things: sanctions relief, to keep his nukes, to split the US ROK alliance, and to dominate the peninsula. During last January's 8th Workers' Party Congress, KJU talked about strengthening North Korea's nuclear deterrent. Last March, the IAEA expressed concerns about the trajectory of North Korea's nuclear program. And last May, the US intelligence community formally assessed that KJU views nuclear weapons as the ultimate deterrent against foreign aggression. That doesn't sound to me like he's going to get rid of his weapons anytime soon. Fifth, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the PRC. I'm often asked about whether South Korea is being forced to choose between its only security ally on the one hand and its largest trading partner on the other. This is a false narrative designed to sow doubt about the history and strength of our alliance. Korea made its choice in 1953. So too did the US in 1950. Moreover, when choosing between not upsetting Beijing and standing up for its own and alliance's interests, it's worth considering the entirety of the cooperation between the United States and South Korea. The US is the second largest investor in South Korea after Japan. Most assume it's the PRC. Combined with Japan, we have 40% of foreign direct investment in Korea. PRC's is in single digits. The PRC market is attractive, but the Lotte Corporation story shows the downside of focusing too much on market access. The US has partnered well with the PRC on several important fronts, but Washington and Beijing fundamentally disagree on how to approach the current international order. The PRC doesn't keep its word, from its treaty with the British on Hong Kong to its human rights abuses against the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and others, to its attempts at commercial espionage and its quest to first isolate, then dominate Taiwan. As I testified when I was the PACOM commander, I believe the PRC seeks hegemony, not only in East Asia, but Greater Asia and beyond. The PRC wants to set the rules for the region, indeed the world, which is why it's essential that free nations exercise vigilance. This is why the US has made it very clear through the Indo-Pacific strategy that we reject foreign policy based on leverage and dominance and seek instead to strengthen relationships based on respect, equal footing, and fair exchange. The US believes in partnership economics. We won't weaponize debt. Instead, we strive to build environments that foster good, productive market economies. We encourage every country to work in its own interest to protect its own sovereignty. Now, while the how-to regarding dealing with Beijing will certainly change across the Biden administration, I note that the fundamental understanding of the PRC has not. Consider the Secretary of State Blinken testified at his confirmation hearing that the previous administration's approach to the PRC is right, that what's happening in Xinjiang is genocide, and that democracy is being trampled in Hong Kong. Secretary of Defense Austin testified that he's focused on the pacing threat posed by the PRC, and he promised strong support for Taiwan. Now that brings us to Taiwan. Taiwan is democratic, an economic and innovation powerhouse, and a global force for good. I've called for the ending of the 50-year US policy of strategic ambiguity in favor of strategic clarity. Now let's talk about Japan. Since the end of World War II, the network of US alliances and partnerships has been at the core of a stable and peaceful Indo-Pacific. No country can shape the future of the region in isolation, and no vision for the region is complete without a robust network of sovereign countries cooperating to secure their collective interests. This is why trilateral cooperation between the United States, South Korea, and Japan is so important. It's crucial for our three nations to work together to enhance our security cooperation and preserve the international rules-based order. Notwithstanding the current tensions between Seoul and Tokyo, and these are not insignificant, the reality is that no important security or economic issue in the region can be addressed without both South Korea's and Japan's active involvement. I was disappointed that South Korea's president did not travel to Tokyo for the Olympics to meet with his counterpart, and that neither had a bilateral meeting during the just completed COP26 in Scotland. I'm not pointing fingers, just opining that these are missed opportunities. Statesmanship is about leading and not following. With elections in Seoul coming in March, of course, Seoul will be focused internally. So the missed opportunity will resonate for a while yet. Now to the Quad. I'm a big fan and booster of the Quad. I called for its resurgence at the inaugural Raisina Dialogue in New Delhi in 2016. Jake Sullivan has said it's the foundation upon which to build a substantial U.S. policy in the region. I recently began calling for the establishment of a Quad Secretariat headquartered somewhere in the region to coordinate among Quad members what issues to take on and perhaps to also get at the question of how new members can join. You know, in college football, the Big Ten has 14 teams and the Big 12 has 10 teams. There's nothing that says the Quad has to have only 4 teams. As Ambassador Hill has said, it is a work in progress. Now, let me be clear. The Quad is not NATO, nor will it ever be a NATO. It's a grouping of like-minded democracies who share an outlook on the region's opportunities, challenges, and dangers, but it is not a defense pact. And that brings me to the new Australia, United Kingdom, and US or AUKUS agreement, which is a defense pact. And I, for one, am all for it, and I'm excited by it. I cannot wait to see a nuclear submarine under Australian colors underway in the Indo-Pacific. I don't believe this will take decades, as some have said, if the 3 countries involved put our hearts, minds, and resources to the task. After all, we put a man on the moon in 8 years and developed a COVID vaccine in less than 1 year. We can do this. Now, finally, we still don't have an ambassador nominated to replace me yet. I get calls or emails from my friends in Seoul on almost a weekly basis. Many of them know that I offered to stay on for 6 months or so until a new ambassador was named. However, it's been over a year since the election, and we still don't even have a nominee. I tell my friends that this is emblematic of the divided political landscape in America in the 2020s. Last November, though, in New York City, I called it legislative malpractice. Now, I'm pleased that we've got a bunch of ambassadors confirmed last month, but there are at least 25 by my count still awaiting confirmation by the Senate, Ambassador Hill being one of them. And this is important. There are some 40 countries, including South Korea, to which the White House has yet to nominate anyone, and we can't blame the Senate in these cases. Think about this. South Korea, a key security ally, a critical economic partner, a global powerhouse, and we don't have a nominee. We need someone nominated now and then confirmed quickly. Folks, I was going to talk about India, January 6th, and other things, but I think I'll stop here so that we can get on with the discussion and the Q's and A's. I look forward to your questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Admiral, and thank you for giving us certainly a lot of food for thought. I'm going to, before I turn it to Joe Detrani, I just would like to perhaps ask one question of many, which is with respect to the sort of open architecture of the Quad, the fact that it could be open to new members. I wonder, as the outgoing ambassador, U.S. ambassador to the ROK, what are some of the considerations the ROK may be giving to this? What are, from their point of view, what are the positives, and if any, what would be the negatives?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Let me just say a couple things about the Quad that I didn't say in my prepared remarks. One, that there's no gatekeeper for the Quad, right? We don't have somebody or some country that says, okay, you can be a member and you can't be a member, and we'd love to have you to be a member. There's no gatekeeper. And that's why I've called for this secretariat as sort of a clearinghouse, so the countries that want to become members, have a process by which they can join. And then the members, I think, are the gatekeepers in the sense of, they have to decide amongst themselves, if there's going to be a Quint or a six, whatever the word for the six is, or seven, and on and on. So I think that's important. So America, the United States, is not the gatekeeper here, and neither is independently Australia, Japan, or India. Now, I will say that all of the members of the Quad not only share a common view of the challenges, opportunities, and dangers in the region, they also get along well with each other. They exercise militarily with each other, and things like that. So that's a consideration, I think. From the South Korean perspective, to get at your specific question, I think that they are going to balance their alliance with the United States and their economic relationship with the PRC, and that's going to be the tipping point. I think there are opportunities that we would like to see South Korea take, not only in this instance, but also in other areas where they should hold the PRC accountable for the PRC's human rights abuses, and there are many fora to do this. But they could boycott the Olympics, as the United States and others have agreed to do, a diplomatic boycott. They could criticize the PRC publicly. They could join the United Nations in condemning North Korea for some of its grotesque human rights violations, and a number of other things. But to do nothing, I think, is weakness. And so, there's opportunities there. I don't know that South Korea wants to come into the Quad. I know there are elements, there are groups of people in South Korea who call for this. But from a national perspective, from a Blue House perspective, I'm not sure that they want to do that. But you'd have to ask them what their view is.
Professor Detrani?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Admiral Harris, thank you for that outstanding presentation. A Happy New Year to all the viewers. This is a very, very interesting platform we have here once a month, as Michael indicated. Today, let me just talk a little about some of the points and then obviously we want to get to the Q&As because we were so fortunate to have Admiral Harris with us today. But let me just mention, the Admiral did mention the 8th Congress of the Workers' Party in North Korea. And we recently saw some of the comments made by Kim Jong-Un at the plenum session of the 8th Congress of the Workers' Party. Basically, Byung-jin talking about we have to get our act together economically. And there's no question about that. There's significant food shortages, significant malnourishment throughout the country. They closed the borders, as we all know, because of the coronavirus, and the sanctions are biting significantly. I think where we are right now with North Korea, and as the Admiral indicated, they're going to be continuing to work on their nuclear and their missile programs, building more nuclear weapons, building even more sophisticated ballistic missiles to deliver those nuclear weapons, but also chemical, biological, and other capabilities, in addition to cyber and some of the other illicit activities they do to acquire the resources to finance their nuclear and missile programs. But what we're seeing with North Korea is a very close, much closer relationship with the People's Republic of China. We just saw the signing of the Peace and Friendship Treaty that goes back to 1961. It was every 20 years. It requires rejudication. It was just signed again in 2021. the relationship between the PRC and North Korea has become that much more closer, that much more significant for the survival of North Korea. What we're also seeing now is that regardless of the sanctions, despite those sanctions that are in place, the UN sanctions, North Korea is getting the crude oil, is getting petroleum products, is certainly getting food and other elements necessary to sustain the economy, to ensure elements of stability in North Korea, and that's coming from China. So despite the sanctions, China is ensuring, and to some extent the Russian Federation, but indeed China is ensuring that North Korea is very much afloat. That there's no question of instability there, and I think that will continue. So as long while we wait for North Korea to come to the table, as we're asking them to come to the table, because if they come to the table, they could hear. They could be told of a roadmap that is meaningful to them, that will address their needs for, if you will, relief with sanctions, security assurances, a path to normal relations, economic development assistance. So the option is with North Korea, but all indications are North Korea is not prepared to come to the table. And I think what we see with the People's Republic of China is they will sustain that economy. They will keep the crude oil, again, despite sanctions. They will ensure that that North Korea is afloat, and that's something that the international community really needs to look at as members of the United Nations. Certainly, these are UN Security Council resolutions. For a member of the UN Security Council to evade or to disregard these imposed sanctions, I think should be scrutinized very, very, very closely. But I think this is what we're going to see. And I think that's the path. So I think the longer this goes on and North Korea builds more nuclear and missile capabilities and becomes that much more reliant on the People's Republic of China, the opportunities that are available to North Korea will fade. The opportunities of coming back to negotiations so that they can become more of a legitimate nation state and they can get sanctions relief, et cetera, will dissipate significantly. That's point one. So I think North Korea is a big issue. I think we really need to look at that. And I really don't think we should not be patient with North Korea. But we can only do as much as we can do. And I think this is where China could really help also, because China could encourage North Korea, not only not to launch an ICBM or to have another nuclear test, which I'm sure they're telling them not to do because of the likely reaction from the United States and others, is that China could encourage North Korea to come to the table, to sit down. And we saw that with Chris Hill. We saw that with the six-party talks, so that we can come to some sort of an agreement here that would address the needs of North Korea. So that's available to North Korea, and hopefully China will assist in getting them to the table. Not only certainly not just disregarding the sanctions, but getting them to the table so that we look for some meaningful resolution to these issues here. On the Quad and South Korea, I totally agree with Admiral Harris on this. This is South Korea's decision. It's a very important decision for South Korea. China is a major trading partner. They've got to live in that region with China, but they're a close ally with the United States. I mean, we talk about Japan, we talk about South Korea in that vein. We're a team here. So that's important. But to respect the sovereignty and so forth, they have to make that decision. And the Quad is not, we're not looking at a military, if you will, a NATO type organization, CETO, going back a number of years. We're talking about cooperation, economic interaction, et cetera. And let me just comment also, or let me ask this question for Admiral Harris, because I do want to get to Q&As for the Admiral. Admiral Harris, we a lot of discussion on OPCON, operational control. We see this even in the election now that's going on in South Korea, where there is some mention about sovereignty issues here, where South Korea needs to take the operational control and so forth. Could you just comment for the audience about OPCOM? Was that, being this is a joint command, someone will take a joint command. This is the United States working with the Republic of Korea. This is our armed forces coming together in a joint command. Is there a criteria for who would take the lead on OPCON, and who would determine if one meets the criteria necessary to take the lead on OPCON? That's my question to you, Admiral Harris.
So, Ambassador DeTrani, thank you for that. Yeah, OPCON, or operational control, is a process by which we're going to determine who has operational control of the combined force. It's the Combined Forces Command in Korea comprises the U.S. forces that are there and would come in case of conflict with the North, as well as the ROK, South Korean military forces. So those two together is the combined force. The Combined Forces Commander today, and it has been since the CFC was established, is a U.S. four-star Army general who is also the U.S. Forces Korea commander and the United Nations commander. So that individual, General LaCamera now, and General Abrams and General Brooks, when I was in Korea and at PACOM, General Scaparrotti before General Brooks, that commander is triple-headed. The process is a formal process. It has been established in both the United States and South Korea to determine the way by which South Korea can assume OPCON, operational control of the combined force in time of conflict with the North, in case the armistice fails. Back in the day, the United States commanded South Korean forces in peacetime as well, but that was given up, I think, in the late 70s, and we retained wartime OPCON. So the discussion today is about wartime operational control. Today, if the armistice were to end, General LaCamera, the U.S. Army four-star on the peninsula, will have command of the combined force. And in that capacity, that commander works for both the Secretary of State in Washington and the Minister of Defense in Seoul. That's his chain of command. It's a bilateral chain of command to the Secretary of Defense and to the Minister of Defense. Now, South Korea has for a number of years asked to have OPCON of their forces in time of war. And we have been supportive of this completely. In the past, it's been a time-based OPCON transition. In other words, we agreed with the Koreans to hand over OPCON on a certain date. And that's happened 2 or 3 times. In each of those dates, as the dates approached, the South Koreans came to the U.S. and said, we're not ready. We need to push this down the road a couple of years so that we can be ready in terms of equipment, in terms of capability, in terms of ability to command and control U.S. forces, communications-wise and all that. We need to have a date later. So we agreed to that. And so as we approached the next date, the South Koreans said, we're not ready. So finally we said, look, hey, this is going to be hard. It's going to get political. Let's have a conditions-based OPCON transition. In other words, here's a list of conditions that, if met, when met, we would agree to hand over OPCON, and the South Koreans would agree to take OPCON. Remember, in the past, they said we weren't ready yet, as each of the time-based dates came close. So we agree to this. Now, when I say we agree to this is important. This is not the United States saying, hey, here are the 26 or whatever number of conditions there are that you have to reach before we hand over OPCON. This is the United States and South Korea formally agreeing on these conditions. So, it's laid out very carefully and very specifically. So when those conditions are met, then we're willing to hand over OPCON, and we want to do that. We're not trying to be difficult about this or whatever. Here are the 26 or so conditions. Once met, a well-hand over opcon. And what that would mean in practicality is simply the four-star commander of the combined force would shift from a U.S. commander to a Korean commander, and the deputy commander, who's a four-star Korean Army general, that would switch to a four-star U.S. general, and that's all it would mean in a visible way, but that's what it means in a bigger sense, and which is why it's hard, because those conditions that both countries agreed on are hard to achieve. It's command and control capabilities, it's ballistic missile defense capabilities, and a whole host of other requirements that are on the table.
Thank you, Admiral.
Dr. Mansourov?
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, Happy New Year to everybody. This is the year of the tiger. Tiger is supposed to be strong and confident, and I'm glad that Admiral Harris came out very strong and very confident with his key points. Now, it's a real honor for me to be on the panel with the Admiral. I remember a couple of years ago when on a fact-finding mission, the Washington Times delegation visited Seoul. He was kind enough to receive us and give a very illuminating talk about what was going on in the peninsula when he was an ambassador in Seoul. So, Admiral, thank you so much for your generosity, for your time, and for your sincere hospitality. Now, I have a couple of issues which I'd like to put for your consideration. One is related to India. I wanted to give you another opportunity to kind of talk a little bit about Indian Quad, and another on Taiwan and South Korea connection. So speaking about India, arguably India is the weakest link in the Quad. I mean, our alliance with Japan is strong as ever. Our alliance with Australia, with Five Eyes, again, is amazing. You mentioned AUKUS as another example how beautiful that alliance is. But India really is probably the weakest link in that arrangement. Not only because our partnership with India is relatively new, it has a long history of friendship and solidarity with the countries which the United States regards as its main adversaries, if you wish. President Putin just visited India a month ago with a state visit, signed a bunch of new arms deals. Again, the Indian relationship with Russia is 70 years old. I mean, it's deep, thick, and very comprehensive. So to kind of count on India and the Quad arrangements, I wonder whether it's a bit of wishful thinking, or maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves here. And so my question in that regard would be, what can the United States do to strengthen its partnership with India so that this weakest link can be a little bit made a little bit stronger, if you wish? So that's about India. Another question on the Korea-Taiwan connection. As you mentioned, again, I'm really encouraged by your recommendation that the United States should move away from its 50-year-old policy of strategic ambiguity and adopt a policy of strategic clarity with respect to Taiwan. But that means hard choices for a lot of countries, including South Korea. And as you know, South Koreans are very ambivalent and concerned about the US-Chinese rivalry and the increasing tensions in our bilateral relationship. I mean, some South Koreans, especially the younger ones, they fear Beijing, as we just heard from one of the presidential candidates in the South. Others, they worry that decline in trade investment from China might hurt South Korean economy. And so, but what's clear is that nobody in Seoul wants to get involved, wants to participate in any kind of military confrontation between the United States and China over Taiwan, God forbids. And so as you know, the strategic policy guidance discussions on the issue of Taiwan with South Korea didn't go anywhere last year. So my question to you is, again, I'm trying to tap into your military expertise here. What can the United States realistically expect South Korea to do in case of the so-called Taiwan contingency? I mean, should we expect that the ROK will sit on the fence, or will provide some real support, or will offer some diplomatic and political support only? Or, again, as a strong ally, we will kachikapsida, we will fight together on the front lines, God forbids if it happens. So if you could be kind enough to elucidate your thinking on those two issues, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, those are tough questions, Dr. Mansourov, but let me try to get at them as best I can. On the first question about India, I hearken back to what I said about the Quad. It's not a defense pact. It's not a NATO. So I would not characterize India as the weakest link. I would characterize India as not a security ally with the United States, as you correctly pointed out that the other two countries in the Quad are, Japan and Australia. And we're also allied with Australia through ANZUS and now through AUKUS. And our history with Australia stretches back a century. The first Americans to fight under foreign command and control was Americans who fought under Australian General Monash during World War I. So that's how we view Australia and how far back that goes. I think that the most important thing that we can do to underscore our new and growing relationship with India today, the most important thing we could do is to confirm Mayor Garcetti, our ambassador nominee to New Delhi, to India. I think it's important that we have an ambassador there in place, Senate confirmed ambassador in place in India. I think also, there are still voices that call for applying CATSA. That's the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, which is a law that says if you buy military equipment from Russia, then we're going to sanction you. I think there are those who call for applying CATSA to India, and I think that we have to temper that with the understanding that most of India's legacy military equipment is Soviet and then Russian, right? And so in order to have their Soviet Russian fighters flying, they have to buy Russian parts for those fighters. And we ought not to penalize India for that. So there ought to be a carve out for that. And they are buying American military hardware to a great degree. The second largest C-17 fleet in the world is Indian. They fly P-8, Boeing P-8 anti-submarine warfare aircraft, the Poseidon, and on and on. So we have to understand that India is not a military ally. They are a military and economic partner, and they have legacy issues that they're dealing with Russia, and we need to get an ambassador confirmed there as soon as possible. With regard to Taiwan, I think that our policy of strategic ambiguity has served us well for 50 years since it came in place. But I think now in the 21st century, we need to change that to a policy of strategic clarity. I think it's important that the Taiwanese understand what America will or won't do if the PRC were to invade them. I think it's important for the PRC to understand what the United States would or would not do in case of an invasion. And most importantly, I think it's important that the American people understand what our National Command Authorities will and won't do in case of an invasion. So for that reason, I've called for ending strategic ambiguity and moving towards strategic clarity. I'm not sure what South Korea would do, to be honest with you. They do want to balance on the fence line between security at one end and economy on the other. And they are very careful in that regard, and they won't telegraph their intentions ahead of time. I will note, however, that South Korea has been with us in Vietnam, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places. They are a true ally of the United States. So there is a lot of history and blood behind that statement, and I think it's important to remember that. I'll stop there for any other questions.
I'd like to jump in. I'd like to jump in with a question here, Admiral. You've spent a lot of time in the Pacific, and you certainly know the debate that went on in the U.S. about the need to do a pivot toward the Indo-Pacific, a pivot away from wars in the Middle East, South Asia. And I wonder if you could comment. You began your presentation with a pretty grim reminder of what all went on in Afghanistan. But in another respect, it was a kind of completion of a pivot in which we have essentially made a decision to, I think, be more focused, to thicken up our presence in the Indo-Pacific. So first of all, would you agree that we've succeeded in thickening up our presence and in being a sort of, being back in a real sense in the Pacific? And I'd also like to ask, because you talked a little about North Korea, but in somewhat in terms that I'm very familiar with, because it doesn't look like a very rosy scenario out there, but perhaps reflecting on the fact that if we don't get this right, and if North Korea is able to continue to develop these weapons, we could be facing, I think, even more difficult situation where other countries will ask about our nuclear umbrella, where other countries may even choose to formulate their own nuclear umbrella. So two questions. Are we back there? Has the pivot succeeded, albeit at tough costs in places like Afghanistan? And secondly, what is the way forward on North Korea?
Great question. I'm just writing down some notes here before I answer it. So, okay. So let me get at your first question about the pivot, Ambassador Hill. So we went, as you know, but in case there are some who don't know, back in the early 2010s, the administration announced the pivot to the Pacific. Kirk Campbell was a big architect behind it, and it was good. And then we changed the name from the pivot to the rebalance, and so now we have the rebalance in the Indo-Pacific. Where back then it was the rebalance in the Pacific, and then. And that went along its way for a while. So I've been critical of both the pivot and the rebalance, not because of its aspirations, of their aspirations, which were terrific. I've always maintained that the United States is a Pacific power, has been a Pacific power, and will always be a Pacific power. And we're in the Pacific to stay. And there are clearly entities out there that would like that not to be. So the idea of the pivot and the idea of the rebalance, those ideas were spot on in my view. The problem with both is they were not resourced. Big ideas require big money in the 21st century, and we didn't resource it properly. So on the ideological level, great idea. But on the practical level, not enough resources to put real teeth in it, and that's where we fell short. Now, to be fair, the world gets a vote in these things, and we were at war in the Middle East, and our focus and our resources rightly went to where American men and women were fighting and dying. And so no criticism of the decision to have something like the pivot or the rebalance, but resources were shifted to where the fighting was, because truly that's where we needed to be in terms of resources. Now, we have now changed that, I believe, and we've changed it where it counts, and that's in resources. So Admiral Davidson, who took my place as the Indo-PACOM commander, he called for a $26 or $27 billion PDI, Pacific Deterrence Initiative, roughly modeled on ERI, the European Reassurance Initiative, which focused on Russia. And this amount of money wasn't all at once. It was to be allocated over a course of 5 or 6 years, and it wasn't an authorization to take the money out of the DoD existing budget and then allocate it to Indo-PACOM. Because if you do that, then you've done nothing, because your big enemy in that case are the services, because they're the ones that are going to suffer the loss in toto of the $5 or $6 billion in 1 year and $26 billion over 5 years. What you need was a top line increase, and that amount of money then be allocated to Indo-PACOM. And he argued for that for his time in office. Admiral Aquilino is now the Indo-PACOM commander, and the NDAA was just signed by President Biden. Whereas DoD asked for a $5 billion in 1 year allocation for PACOM, Indo-PACOM, the Biden administration, the Congress, and then the Biden administration, President Biden signed it, $2 billion extra in that PDI, Pacific Deterrence Initiative. So it was a $7 billion allocation, and that's real money. And so I think finally we got around to providing real assets in response to specified requirements levied by the Indo-PACOM commander through and then Secretary of Defense. So I'm optimistic about that, and I think we finally got it right. And for sure, one of the reasons we're able to allocate the money is because we pulled out of Afghanistan. So there you go on that. On North Korea, I do not believe that it is a rosy scenario. I think it's a dark scenario, getting darker every day. We know the issues that are in North Korea, the famine, the food, the shortages and all that. They don't have coronavirus. If you ask them, you can believe that or not. Everybody can make your own decision on that. I do think that if you look at the past two administrations, on the one hand, there was this strategic patience. So that was the Obama administration's approach. And then there was the all or nothing approach from the Trump administration. I think that the idea of a calibrated approach, a practical approach, a solutions-based approach, to use Kirk Campbell's words, I think that approach is the right approach with North Korea. We have done, I think, all that we could do with regard to encouraging North Korea to come back to the negotiating table without any preconditions at all. And I think it's up to them. If they have their way, we'll give up stuff. We'll give up sanctions. We'll give up military exercises and readiness. We'll give all this stuff away, and then I believe they'll come to the table and they'll leave, and they'll take with them the sanctions, the weakened sanctions regime, the decrease in readiness, and all that. And they'll be in a better position, and we'll be in a worse position. We have to have them come to the table without conditions, without preconditions, and let's have a discussion. Let's get the right people at the table, the right countries at the table, and have that discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I mean, we could go on and on, Dr. Jenkins, but I see you popped up on the screen, and it suggests to me that we've reached the end of the hour. So let me turn it over to you, Dr. Jenkins, but we've really enjoyed this discussion.
Thank you, Ambassador Hill. As always, thank you for your leadership. And to Dr. Mansourov and Ambassador Detrani, it's such a fascinating discussion. Admiral Harris, it's been an honor to be with you today. It was very, very factual and enlightening. And we have a lot of work to do to support some of the initiatives that are going on, especially with the Quad. And we're grateful to the Washington Times, which will be covering our program today, and our sponsors, the Universal Peace Federation, and also the Washington Times Foundation. We have this program every first Tuesday of the month, and we're just really inspired to see so many great Americans coming forward who have the experience of diplomacy and also various aspects of governance and leadership. And we really want to encourage all of you to really see the future is going to be good. I believe that we're going to see a change in the relationship, as Ambassador Detrani is calling for. We're going to see a change in the relationship between America and North Korea. That's our hope. And the ROK, we strengthen our allies with the Quad. And we also want to engage China in every way we can in a peaceful way to find a common ground of something that's good for everyone, which would be denuclearization. Thank you, everyone. Again, Ambassador Hill, we're very honored to have your moderation for all these programs. And everybody have a happy new year. This is a great year looking forward. Thank you. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.